So we just finished
Part 1 and 2?
Part 1. Now we're on part 2. I think that's what we'll do. This is part 2. Part 2 of the federal budget, because there was so much to talk about. And we actually wanted to dig into the tenant part of it because there was two sides to it, I feel.
Right.
Because it actually started off that we were going to talk about buying a property with a tenant in it, which we may even have to leave for another time. But yeah, there was too much to talk about in the first episode. So we're gonna give tenants their own episode.
Yes. So if you're a tenant, this is something that was geared towards you. Again, this budget was all about how can we create things more affordable around housing, which is why anyone who touches housing is talking about this particular budget. And a huge piece of it, we talked about it earlier, is that rent has been going up quite significantly, which is contributing to this all inflation issue. Okay, so what did he do? He being Trudeau. He has granted $15 million over 5 years, and that $15 million is to go to tenant-run organizations.
So this was called the tenant fund, correct? This was the first pillar of it? Okay.
Yes, and so what this does is a couple of things. So these dollars have to go to things like free legal services for tenants only. Okay.
So not pro bono lawyers.
Pro bono, yeah. I don't even know. It doesn't say how it's going to be trickled down, but there's different ways.
Oh, it doesn't? That's so interesting. How there's no details to it. Okay. Yeah.
So this is why
I just can't. So it's like this shiny toy, and then it's like the Wizard of Oz. He's behind the curtain, and then
boom.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I don't really know how that's going to work. There are different ways you can do it. Certainly to the organizations. I worked at at Parkdale Community Legal Services in the tenant division, so it could be funds going to stuff like that.
And there is a need for it for sure. I have definitely heard of horror stories, or people called me saying I have a friend and they don't know what to do and they're being told this and they're being told that. And I don't necessarily believe that there is enough or obvious or accessible resources for tenants or the average tenant to understand. I think, listen, a lot of tenants don't even know they can use a realtor to find a property and fight for their, all of the logistics around the lease. Right, inclusions and listen, the rights are the rights. But anyway, I think I think if it goes to the right place for the right reasons, I think then it's
the landlord and tenant board also has a legal aid part. So it could go there. I don't know. Because remember, a lot of
or
this
maybe
is
backlog to avoid the backlog, right?
Yeah.
Because I think this is also a very important episode for landlords to know.
Yes. So this fund is going to be going to pay for that type of service. Now, does it help with the backlog? I don't think so, because there's no money going to the actual tribunals to open up and hire people to actually hear these cases.
So we know that's not happening. Okay.
No. Right. So the backlog will continue, but legal resources will be provided through this fund to tenants across Canada. Now, remember.
Sorry, can I just interrupt? I just realized what's being set up. So the tribunal is still backed up.
Correct.
But there's more money going to the tenants to understand their rights
and sue.
And sue. And again, this is not a negative.
Go to court.
No, and this is not This is not a negative tenant. I really want to show both sides of it. But what I think what it creates, and what makes me crazy is that it creates this us versus them. Right. And I have to say, there's good and bad people in everywhere. There's great landlords. There's people who just, want to take a little bit of money that they earned and put it into an investment and create. By the way, it does create housing. I just want to put it out there. And then, but there's also slummy. I have had to help tenants call and say, you're not allowed to do that. I'm stepping in. There are people that do try to push the law onto, outside of where it should be. And then there are tenants who also are wonderful and just want to be there and just want security, and they pay their rent on time and they want to be left alone. And then there are also tenants who are I'm going to ask for $20,000 if you want to sell this condo. Yes. And I'm not leaving unless you do. And if the tribunal's backed up,
how are you going to deal with that? It's still going to be in limbo. So that I don't think that's going to be solved at all. There's something else that I found interesting in this sort of tenant fund, which had to do with the Bill of not the Bill of Rights, Bill of Rights, rather.
Well, he created a new
Bill of Rights. Yeah, a new tenant Bill of Rights, which we'll talk about, because there's actually nothing when it comes to what these rights happen to be. Having worked in this space, there are a plethora and like robust rights for tenants across Canada already. So I'm a little bit confused as to like what that will actually result in, specifically because the province is the ones that actually carve it out. He also wants to create cleaner, standardized, simple to understand leases across Canada.
Oh, you know what, by the way, I saw that. And so Ontario has
We already have
the
our
residential
standard.
tenancy agreement, which is very clean. And I actually have a client who will sometimes list certain properties with me that they have their own property manager or whatever, just to have extra eyeballs. And they don't sign the real estate, like the OREA paperwork. They just do the residential tenancy agreement. And the reality is that that's all you need, because legally you have to have that. So I was actually surprised to hear that they don't have, I guess they just don't have simple ones across the different provinces. Is it necessary to have the same one in every province?
Most provinces have
I think they should
simplified
simplify
forms.
them.
Most provinces
Why does it have to
already
be the same one?
I'm not sure about that. Also, like most provinces already have
I think
simplified
he's just justifying
forms.
his existence. I'm just saying that. I'm just saying. Like, well, I don't understand why that needs to be like a standardized one. I think they should have simplified ones without a doubt.
So I'm licensed in Alberta,
Call her.
Manitoba, and I have knowledge about BC. It's kind of the same when it comes to the laws with respect to residential tenancies. It's pretty similar. So I don't see as this being a big win, is my point. So I don't know how that's going to really help tenants at this time.
It's a line item.
Yeah, so that's something like make leases simpler, fine. The only thing that I think is pretty good is the fact that we're going to provide more resourcing, like legal resourcing. That makes sense to me. Now the next big one, and I have to get your thoughts on this. There's a couple more, but let's talk about.
I'm sure I'll have no opinion on it.
I think you have no opinion on this one. Disclosing so making it more transparent, disclosing past rent
Did he say how he would do that?
I think he wants to have like a registry, which has existed in the past. Registries have existed in the past, like rent registries.
Like it's an online portal that they can go into.
This was I think this was under the Ray days. So this was like what, the 80s?
Ooh, those are bad words in the Ontario.
Oh, I know.
the
Ray days. And
although he's back in government. Anyway, we are not going to get political. So I would say I think it's similar to the ability to see past sales of homes.
Right. Okay.
So people want to know what something sold for. Listen, I've had clients who are buying something who will say to me, when did they buy it and what did they pay for it? It doesn't matter. It doesn't.
Is like the dramatic pause?
It doesn't matter. No,
Doesn't
because
matter.
either you
agree.
want to buy it for market value or you don't. What the other person bought it for and how much money they're making on it, whatever it is irrelevant to your purchase. So to me, you want to buy that house across the street. How much is that worth? I'm going to give you my opinion. What they paid for it. If they made a killing, great, right? If they didn't, they're losing their shirts. Is it going to change things? It's horrible. I mean, it's the same. And then rental, it's similar in the sense that, first of all, you can see. Mm-hmm. I guess if you don't have anybody helping and you're going to a building, you're saying, well, how much was this rented for last month? Can you
not see it on the same way you can see sold data on
I don't know. Platforms? I don't think how Sigma does it.
Or you can just do a Google search and you can see it where it was on Kijiji a couple years ago.
I don't know if he's heard of the internet, but I'm sure it's there. But I think that what are you going to say to the landlord? Well, you rented this out last month for $1,700. Now you want $2,500. And he's going to say, yeah, or her. And they're like, well, I want it for $1,700. Well, we're not going to give it to you for $1,700. What? The ability to negotiate. And that was the wording that was used, is that tenants will be given the ability to negotiate. They could negotiate before, but if there's something called supply and demand, so if there's no demand, you can negotiate. If there is tons of demand, you've got nothing to
What are you going to negotiate
on offer night? You're going to go in a house. Well, I know you got 20 offers, but I want it for less. Great, good for you.
Because you sold it
Hit the road.
You bought it 5 years ago for less.
It's like they've come up with these solutions for an industry they don't understand.
I was going to say, Rachel, you need your own show. I'm like, oh, that's right, you have a show.
Well, so they're like, you need to be on television. I'm like, no, thank you. But it really is the most ridiculous thing. And then so people are like, oh my God, that's so great. We're going to be able to see. There's other things like, for example, if your building was built before 1990, is it 1996? I can't remember the cutoff. It's rent controlled, so they aren't allowed. Now, I think that if they do improvements, that there's some wiggle room around that.
But the big caveat there, it's rent controlled for the particular renter. So like I can only increase the rent year over year X%.
Right,
but if they move out and someone else is it's
by the way,
dealer's
so
choice,
again,
right?
same client. He owns several buildings in the city. He will buy an old apartment building, take all the tenants that are in there, and again, just usual by law, increase the rent. Any one of them leaves, he goes in, he guts the place, he improves the building, and then yes, lo and behold, he puts the rent up. So, I'm going to get flack from renters who are like, well, that's gouging us. Well, no, he's improved the building. He's given you a nicer place. If you can't afford that, and I get that, that's fine. But there's someone else who might want to have a nicer place. And so he is improving the building to improve his investment.
Right, but he's not, I suspect he's not making like oodles off of that rental increase because you actually have to put money into the unit to improve it.
But he also puts
is
it up for
expensive.
market. But let's also remember this. If he were, let's say they're like, he's gouging. Right. He's going to double the rent. Do you think that he wants to double the rent and leave it there empty? Like, how does it benefit a landlord to increase the rent to such an extent that you could say that he's gouging to leave it empty?
So what I think will happen, I think we're at a bit of a breaking point when it comes to rent rates because...
I thought you say breaking point of this podcast. But like, I'm out.
I'm out. No. No. But you're right. So, for example, if I'm a landlord, right, and I can't find someone who's able to afford my rent, then I have to decrease it. I'm not interested in having like a nice number out there and nobody paying me, or saying, tenant, pay me $5,000 for rent, and they can't afford it, so they're going to start defaulting. What was the point of that? So, like, the point being is that he's not putting out a number there where it's not also substantiated, meaning that he put money in to improve the unit, right? So he's not just doubling the rent because someone left. He's putting money in so that he can increase the rent.
Listen, it all comes down to, and by the way, there are landlords that do that though.
Oh,
there are 100% landlords that go in and someone leaves and they're like, okay, great, slap a coat of paint on it and they double the, right? Because that person might have been in there for 10 years. But I mean, no one's like freaking out about it in New York. That's what happens in New York. I mean, they literally will like hold on to a property for 20, 30 years and not move. I mean, I know someone whose parents live in New York and they have lived on the Upper East Side. Okay, they are professors. And I'm like, huh? And they're like, no, they got in there 40 years ago.
Oh, they're never going to move.
They're not leaving. Right, and I think that that's what's going to happen in Toronto.
Which decreases supply,
but
which
again,
causes more problems because you have no supply and tons of demand.
I truly, truly appreciate the affordability issue that tenants are up against. It is horrible. You can't get paid a minimum wage and be able to afford anything. I worry for my own children. I worry for everybody that has to go out there and be able to make enough money to have a place to rent, just to rent, never mind own something.
And then save.
I get it.
On top of renting.
Right.
How do you do that?
I think, but there's both sides. There just is. And if this city is too expensive, it's going to drive, and I mean, I don't even want to get into the whole cap gain thing because that's going to drive, I think that's going to drive a lot of rentals out.
I think you're right. Like, I think that there's going to be people either disposing of properties now before it's implemented, so that we might see a bit more.
They did it retroactive, so this cap gain is now an increase I didn't know that. Is as of June 25th, 2024. So who can just...
not retroactive, it's this year.
No, but it's almost retroactive because it's like, how do you, all of a sudden now you're like, it's not as if, by the end of 2025, we are going to implement this. It's like
coming soon.
Right now.
Right.
You have someone in there who's a tenant. How are you getting rid of your property? And the condo market is dead.
Yes, and so that's going to be more problematic, which is interesting because I don't really see how this is going to actually improve. I'm just looking at my notes here. Anything with respect to build, well, there is an exemption, like a GST exemption when you build rentals. And so maybe that's a piece of this that he's saying, like I'll be creating more supply as a result.
I mean, it's nice. I mean, I would have to hear from someone who from a developer to understand if that actually makes a difference to them. I mean, I think that the transparency on the rental rates
that's not
is. I think it sounds good, just like he promised to do. No more blind bidding, which has also not gone anywhere. I would say the positive one that I thought was very interesting, although I still want to understand how they're going to implement it, and I didn't know this, was that your rent does not go towards your credit.
Oh, this one.
So now they want to implement that by paying your so this is interesting part of it. So basically what he's proposing is that you paying your rent is now like as if you're paying your credit card off, you're paying your car payments, that you would pay your rent on time and it would go towards your credit score, which is great because good credit score will help you in the long run. So no one really knows how that's going to be implemented. I know there's like programs. I just don't know what like the adoption rate is of that. And what's that going to cost landlords? Because we all know
landlords have to do it.
Well, is it going to be like the 4% of dentists that actually like signed on for the dental program that he's offered also? Like, I mean, I think it's all in the execution, right?
Oh, for
But
sure.
I think that is actually a great added piece because I think that's your biggest bill of the month, I would think, and have that go towards a positive.
Even if you have a great credit score, two things. One, you still can't afford to buy anything.
No, it doesn't help that for
right?
sure.
And then two, what I found interesting is that these programs exist in the private sector. So there are companies that exist in North America that do precisely that. I don't know how they work. Like, I don't know the details of them, but from what I understand is that tenants can be part of the program or landlords can be part of the participate.
Can.
Yes, and what it does, it just helps show that you've not been delinquent and it goes to your credit rating.
But I mean, again, like Oxford Properties, Starlight, like those companies, I'm sure Sterling, they might opt in, but
I don't know though if
the
it's a
average
tenant
guy that owns the condo that you're renting him from, probably not.
And I don't know if it's the landlord or the tenant that does this. Like, I just don't know how the information is captured.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like, so is it captured?
I didn't even think it would be I wouldn't even think that it would be the renter that got control of that.
Yeah, because like, you'd be self-reporting. That's not, but unless it like taps into, I don't know, perhaps.
Your bank or something.
Yeah, and given that we have open banking coming soon.
Yeah, that's a whole other.
Yeah, so it could be something like it just allows for these programs and platforms to tap into. I don't know how that's going to actually work.
Well, you know what also I don't know how it's going to work? If you don't pay your rent on time. So there was nothing talked about how it would go on a negative side, how it would hurt your credit if you didn't pay.
Ooh, and like what if you're a day late?
Not a word, nothing outlined about whether you don't pay your rent on time and how this would affect your credit. So it was only for people who were paying it on time and wanted to build up a good credit score. It had nothing on the flip side of it.
So I don't know if that's useful. There's products that exist. I don't know. That's a really good point. How much it damages you if not. Now, shall we take a couple minutes to talk about what you need to know if you do have a tenant right now and you are looking to sell your home?
Well, if you are someone who wants to drop your property because the cap gain increase is coming, which only gets really interesting over $250,000.
Yes, it's only $250,000, yeah.
But under that, it sounds like under $250,000,
it's a regular tax.
It's a regular tax that hasn't gone up, but anything over $250,000. So again, it is a taxing of the wealthy, and because if you own a condo, chances are you'd have to hold on to it for quite a bit of time to make that kind of money. Anyway, all that to be said, your tenants, if they have a lease, that lease goes with the new owner, so it's transferable just automatically. If they're month to month, I believe the only way you can have a tenant leave is if you are going to move into that property yourself, or if your first relative, so a child or a parent, is going to move in and needs that for a dwelling for themselves. Outside of that, you cannot go to them and say, I need to sell.
Get out.
You have to leave. So you might have someone who says, listen, I don't want to go through, showings. I have clients who found out that the house was being sold that they lived in. They didn't want to go through showings. They were ready to leave anyway. They found a new place, and they're lovely people, and they just quietly left because that was best for them. Not that they should have made it an issue, but they could have turned around and said, listen, we're incredibly busy.
Cash for keys.
Well, that's a whole other, for sure. That's the other option. But they could have turned around and said, we're really, really busy. Like, we're really, really busy. We have 2 demanding jobs. One of them travels. The other husband just is like, they're just so busy. And they say, we can't find anything. Like, we don't have time to find anything. Right. We need more than 60 days.
Yeah.
I don't know if you go to the tribunal. Like, I've heard people go to the tribunal and they'll be like, okay, extend it.
Yeah.
And if you've sold it, and I've had clients who have bought a tenanted property, if I represented the buyer, I would say, you can't, like the paper that it's written on that says that the seller agrees to deliver a vacant property is not worth $1. So unless you're holding back monies to say, well, I'll buy your property, but I'm going to hold back $50,000 to cover me in case I have to pay cash for keys, which means you pay the tenant to leave to give you the keys to go, you're in big trouble. And on that deal, they had a tenant in the basement that was, the sellers had a tenant in the basement that was paying $1,500. They paid him out $18,000 to leave.
Excuse me?
Didn't have enough money, couldn't find a place to live, couldn't afford it. I mean, it's not very easy to replace a $1,500 basement apartment either. It's not even like the first and last month's rent. It's you've been in a place for a long time, rent controlled, you haven't gone up. Now all of a sudden you wake up, it's like, Cinderella woke up out of a sleep and is like in modern day, and it's like, oh my God, where am I gonna find a place to live? So, and unfortunately, this is where it concerns me, because the federal government, who are they giving this money to? And there are organizations that do represent tenants, and tenants should have all the rights in the world. I'm not saying that. But if they're giving money to these people who are saying, and there are people who believe this, well, we were a tenant in there, we helped them increase the value of the property, and we deserve a piece of it. So I lived in your condo. We paid you $2,000 a month for the last 3 years. That condo is now worth X amount. We deserve some of that increase.
So, and do you see buyers thinking about property as having more value as a result of a tenant being in it?
No, less. So first of all, if you're a first-time home buyer, understand this. If you go and buy a property and you don't have 20% down and you're an insured mortgage and you show up on that day and that tenant, or there's not something in writing, CMHC will not approve your mortgage because it will see it as a tenanted property, and they don't fund investment properties. So you actually have to have something in writing that shows that that tenant will be leaving before. I don't even think an N12 or an N11 is worth it. Like, you have to have an affidavit, you have to have something. So that's one. So if you're someone who's buying a property and you are a first-time buyer, don't touch it. Second of all, I mean, and I have a client who owns a condo and he's waiting for those numbers to make sense for him. And he called me once and I said, I just want you to understand, when you sell, I would approach the tenant, because you're better off to pay it up front and say, listen, I need to sell the condo. I don't want to disrupt you. You've been a wonderful tenant. I'd like to help you. How much time do you need, and how can I compensate you? Right. And if there's a reasonable conversation to be had, just do it then.
Right. Yeah, to your point, it's very difficult to get a tenant out if you already have also a lease that has a certain, it's called a fixed lease. So let's say you want to sell your property and the tenant has a lease that ends December 31, 2025. Okay, you think, well, I could just list it, and then aren't the rules that the new buyer can just go in there because they're going to personally live in that particular...
They have to leave. Nope.
No, you cannot serve notice before December 31st. Well, you serve notice prior to, but you can't have them leave before December 31st, 2025. So, like, understand that again, fixed leases, the end date, you can't break it. There's no breaking it, right? And so be very careful when you buy a property too, so that you don't misunderstand the rules as well. That you think, well, because I'm moving in, I can have them leave. It's not how it works. There are also certain notice requirements as well.
Yes, and even after that fixed lease is over, they don't leave. Like, in the old days, when like they were like, oh, the lease is, you would go to the tenant, you would say, okay, it's time to renew our lease, and we would sign it. I don't know if that was the Residential Tenancy Act change or what it was, but you no longer have to renew a lease. You just go month to month after that.
So that's been, I don't know when, but that's been like for a while. So a fixed term in my example would just converts over to month.
Yeah.
Right. And so again, you have to make sure someone who's going to sell, a big thing that the boards look at is if you gave enough notice. So make sure you know and work with a realtor, work with a professional that can tell you the proper amount of notice to provide that, hey, and your buyer's coming in.
Honestly, paralegals, I think, are going to be the ones that have the keys to the kingdom very soon.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of paralegals now. No, because otherwise, you're doing it on your own, and most investors don't know what they're like. Literally, again, this couple that I know who I put into a rental house called me, and I said, oh no, they're not allowed to do that. He's not allowed to do that. But and then when I told them to push back, you could tell he got legal advice afterwards. So I think that a lot of people may go on the basis that they're just doing what they thought they could do. Not everybody's doing it to be slumlords, and they aren't getting the right advice. So on some level, I get that they're giving money, and you think, oh, well, they're investors, they can afford a lawyer, they have more money. Yes, usually they obviously would, more than a tenant. But the reality is that they don't necessarily always know either.
No, and that goes back to the whole idea of the fund that's being provided for tenants. It's interesting because, of course, we're supporting tenants to know their rights, but you're saying even landlords don't even know.
Listen, the big corporations know, the seasoned investors know, but the reality is that average person, when I have a client who's like, you know what, I want to buy a condo, I want to find an investment, and then maybe I'm going to give it to my kids later, or I'm going to sell it or whatever, they don't know. They don't know. Most people are like, oh, I'll just hold on to it, and then, after a year, the tenant will leave, and I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way, right?
The biggest misunderstanding that I commonly see is that, again, when it's a fixed term lease, that I can break it whenever I want. If I want to physically move into that space, it's just not how it works. Even with weekly rents or monthly, you still have to give a lot of ample notice. I think it's months of notice before you can actually physically move in. And to your point, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to do that. So that's really good advice. Or even that the
tribunal will get them, listen, they could be like, I don't have any money, I have no family, I'm going to be on the street, I'm sick. Yeah. I've been in and out of the hospital. Yeah. Listen, and I'm saying all these things, they're true, they're not making them up. And how do you throw someone like that out? It's horrible.
Yes.
And there aren't any social services for these poor people. And that's the reality.
Another reality too is that there are ways that just because you bought the property, now let's say you gave the proper notice, I can move in. Not necessarily. What can also happen is if that individual can show that they have ties to the community, then they can challenge that, saying, I'm not going anywhere because I have ties to the community. What does that mean? Your kid's going to school, they can't find
they don't want to
else.
pull them out, for sure.
Yeah, and so there's all these other elements as well.
That's a viable answer. You're uprooting my whole life. But I say this, and this will be the last, when you think about rentals and what's left out there now, that's it. It's that it's either a condo that you have an individual who's renting it to you, or you have one of these bigger homes, and you can get kicked out of that condo. Not kicked out. It's more that your life can be displaced, because at the end of the day, if someone is going to sell it and that end user is going to move out, they're moving in. And you are going to have to leave eventually, whatever that. So you have to ask yourself, do I want to be uprooted that way?
Yes, exactly. So we'll see. The budget is looking at creating a lot more affordable rentals. It will take time. It's not going to alleviate any of these problems. And frankly, I don't really know what the new Bill of Rights is going to look like, because the coordination that has to happen across all provinces, then the municipalities, I just don't really know what that's going to do. So we'll see what that shapes up like as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Until the next budget.